Hi guys, it's the 9th of May, just a great opportunity to catch up with Kevin O'Rourke of Reformasi Weekly. Before I do that, I guess I'll just give a little bit of context about, we're going to be talking today about Indonesia and with in my view, the best analyst of Indonesia, Kevin O'Rourke. I'll put a bit of perspective around that. Uday, I might get you to just talk about elections that have just finished and those that are pending. And of course, Indonesia's one's not too far away. Could you give us some key dates there?
Sure, Paul. So in Timor-Leste, the presidential elections were held on the 19th of March, but the second round was held on April the 19th. Today is the Philippines general elections, which is ongoing at the moment. The Australian federal elections will be held on May 21st. And in Papua New Guinea, the general elections will be held from the 11th to the 24th of June. Coming back to Indonesia, February 14th, 2024 is the presidential and legislative elections planned.
Okay, great. So obviously today we're going to focus in as a part of our election series with Kevin O'Rourke, but the Indonesian elections obviously relevant just because of the size and power it holds within ASEAN. You know, roughly 40% of the ASEAN economy is Indonesia. Still a long way to the election, but the policies and the jockeying for power, key candidates and political powers that are all emulating mostly in Jakarta have got a great relevance to what's going to occur in the election. Kevin, of particular interest, I think, to our clients and to most pundits and people with businesses in Indonesia is this kind of veiled feeling out by Jokowi if he could get away by extending his term and going against the constitution. He seemed to muff around. What's your read on that?
Yeah, well, thankfully that's finally subsided. It was quite a saga, and it was a perilous moment, really, for Indonesia's democratization. Basically, there was a group around the president that feels threatened by the end of the president's term. Their political careers would basically be over, and so they sought to find some way to engineer the system to extend his tenure by at least a couple of years, but you know, yeah, it's a slippery slope, so could have gone on for for whoever knows how long. And the way to do that would have been to amend the Constitution, but fortunately, the document is written in a way to guard against that. So there were safeguards that imposed thresholds that were too difficult for this group to overcome. The sufficient party support was lacking. So finally, on April 10th, a day before some planned student demonstrations, the president relented and in writing issued a statement saying that he would not seek to extend his term. And so that has laid the issue to rest. But in the meantime, it's really caused some tensions, and it's exposed some important fissures or differences between some of the key parties, which are relevant for how they might align ahead of the next election.
I think it's really interesting that the new order's, struggling to get to grips with it. They're the old order, I guess. Megawati and Prabowo are probably the last bastions. Obviously now it's probably looking, ironically, 20 odd years on, and perhaps it's the first chance for one of the new order to become the new order again and not be dislodged. I mean, Prabowo is a real bet, not a real bet, but I mean, he's a real key player in this next election. I've always been quick to bet against him for various reasons, but this is probably his best chance. He's certainly good at making comebacks because he owes a few financial favours to brothers and whatnot. Do you think he has a realistic show? And who are the other key players?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, the prospects for Prabowo Subianto cannot be discounted. He's definitely still a formidable player. He's performed, quite well in the past two elections. In 2019, he won almost 45% of the national vote. Things have changed a bit since then, and some credible opinion polls don't show him at that level now, but they do show him on top, or at least tied for first place with Ganjar Pranowo. So that's the governor of Central Java. And unlike Prabowo, he's a directly elected official, so he has a track record having won elections twice and having performed quite successfully, heading the country's third largest province for 8 years. He's got a lot of charisma. He's very reform-minded. He's keen to engage in reforms for clean governance and the environment, social protection, and supporting investment in business and job creation. Very forward-thinking. He's not perfect. There's drawbacks and shortcomings for sure, but among the major potential contenders identified by opinion polls, he's by far the most interesting, especially considering the contrast with the style and record of Prabowo, who would likely bear closer resemblance as president to one of the more hardline heads of countries around the world, like Duterte in the Philippines, or Modi in India, or Bolsonaro in Brazil. The third figure is Anies Baswedan. He's the governor of Jakarta, having been elected in 2017. He tends to get his backing mainly from Islamic-oriented groups, although he himself has a religious persona, but is fairly moderate, all things considered. But he's a bit weaker in the polls than Prabowo and Ganjar, so he's very much the third candidate. Beyond him, other potential contenders are really trailing at a distance. The key thing about the polls is that Ganjar, the Central Java governor, has upside potential because his name recognition is still relatively low. So as more voters become aware of him, he's likely to gain strength in polls and surpass Prabowo. And in fact, the latest poll that came out in April shows that that may, in fact, already be underway.
Yes, and I remember you telling us that a couple of months ago, so it does appear to be going that way. So it would safe to be say that Prabowo and Ganjar are likely to be the second round shoot-off, aren't they? No one's going to get that 50-odd% in the first round. And then what happens in the second is remarkably different because suddenly people confirm on the guy that got second. So getting the most in the first round doesn't sort of guarantee, and historically it's proven that the second round two-man show-off or the two-person show-off's a different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So if there's a three-way race in the first round, it's probable that a second round runoff would be necessary. However, what really complicates the scenarios here is the nominating threshold rule. So a ticket for president must have backing from a party or an alliance of parties that accounts for 20% of seats in parliament. So the problem here is that there's three potential presidential contenders plus a bunch of other weaker ones. Meanwhile, there's 9 parties in parliament, but they're highly fragmented. Only one surpasses the threshold on its own. It's Megawati's PDI Perjuangan, which is likely gravitating towards Prabowo. So Prabowo has his own party. So there's 7 other parties, and how they might align behind whom, Prabowo or Ganjar or Baswedan, is very much unclear right now, and these party leaders seem to be really befuddled by all the different permutations and calculations, and so they're all showing risk aversity right now. So basically, Ganjar has not had any endorsements from any party. So there's an outside chance that these parties will cartelize and safeguard their interests against a reformer like Ganjar, and crowd him out of the election, prevent him from running by withholding their support. I think that's an outside chance, but it's something to be cognizant of. It would be a real disaster, basically. The good thing is that Ganjar seems to be poised to overtake Prabowo in the polls right now. They're basically tied, and assuming, as seems likely, that he'll continue gaining strength, it's going to be too difficult for these parties to ignore his popularity. So enough of them will be tempted to back him. He would need support from Golkar and one other party, or 3 other parties without Golkar.
So Golkar's position is going to be quite key, isn't it?
Sorry?
I said Golkar's decision is going to be a key factor, isn't it? Just given its size and its national reach.
Yeah, they account for 14% of the seats in parliament. So that party would need only one other ally in order to back a ticket, which it's only Garindra, Prabowo's party, is the only other one in that position. So the problem is Golkar's chair is Erlangga Hartarto, the coordinator and economics minister, and he is just adamant that he intends to run for president himself, even though his support in opinion polls is approximately 0%. And I think what he's doing is trying to safeguard his own position within Golkar. If he were to not be the party's nominee, then others within the party would maybe maneuver to supplant him. But in the meantime, while he's occupying that slot, it's preventing Golkar from backing Ganjar. And basically, Erlangga has shown that he's very unpredictable. He was the key person promoting the extension of Widodo's term. And so it's a bit unsettling because it suggests that Golkar could take some extreme stance, could even verge into Prabowo's camp. So it makes things quite unpredictable.
Just a quick one for Uday or Anshika. Would you like to raise a question or a point?
Yeah, just a quick. Sorry.
Okay, Uday, go ahead.
Yeah, speaking of camps, Kevin, so you have Golkar, Jarindra and Prabowo. Do you see them aligning with Megawati? They've been spending a lot of time together, and PDIP seems to be warming up to them. So those would be two of the biggest parties in parliament backing Prabowo and possibly Puan Maharani, who have not done well in polls. So how do you see this?
Yeah, this is a real feature of Indonesian politics. It's very counterintuitive because Ganjar is a PDIP member. So ordinarily, a party that has a member who's on top of the polls would nominate that person for president and thereby win the presidency, especially if the party already surpasses the nominating threshold on its own. But not in Indonesia. It's not that simple. What matters with PDIP for the chair and the founder, Megawati, is her own position and her power and sustaining the control over the party for her family lineage, namely, as you mentioned, Puan Maharani, the parliament speaker, who's her daughter. So they distrust Ganjar as somebody who would be a rival to them in their party. So basically, they're more concerned about safeguarding the control of the party than they are about building the party or even winning the presidency for the party. So therefore, the plan is to align Puan with Prabowo on a ticket, and that would elevate her from parliament speaker to vice president. She's still relatively young, so it would be a step up for her. Prabowo had been the running mate of Megawati herself 13 years ago in the 2009 election. They're both related to former presidents, so they see themselves as being aristocrats, if you will. So that's sort of the plan right now. However, it could change. There's a lot of bad blood Puan and Ganjar, but maybe they could overcome that. So a PDIP nomination for Ganjar is not entirely out of the picture, but right now it seems like it's going to be PDIP and Garindra behind Prabowo, and Golkar is up in the air. And then there's parties such as Nasdem and the Yudhoyono family's Democrat, and hope perhaps one other backing Ganjar, and then maybe the remainder of the parties would back Baswedan, something like that.
Would Prabowo see teaming up with Puan as a potential negative on him running, just given she's a big capital nobody, other than her mother? Nobody sees her as a credible leader.
Right. So there it comes down to the nominating threshold, because Garindra has 13% of seats in parliament, so they need some party to align with them. And Prabowo's relations with the other party chairs are not that strong. So PDIP, if nothing else, gets him over the nominating threshold. But the problem is indeed that Puan is not a boost to the ticket. She's unpopular. And polls actually suggest that she would weigh on the ticket, and Prabowo would perform worse with her than he would with some of the other names out there as potential running mates. So this is one of the reasons why things may yet change between now and then, yes.
Thanks, Kevin. Anshika, over to you for your question.
Right. So, Kevin, my question was about Golkar and Hatarto specifically, considering we recently saw his party go against him when he was pushing for a constitutional amendment to have another potential term for Jokowi, but then the party went ahead and said that, okay, that's not the party's stand. So does he really have hold over the party wherein he can actually command the party to act a certain way or actually sway them to act a certain way? It seems like there is a bunch of dissonance there. So that's the first one that I have. And then I have two more questions.
So you were breaking up a little bit, Anshika. Were you talking about Golkar or Gurinder or PDIP?
Golkar. I was talking about Golkar and
Golkar.
Hatarto, yeah,
Okay.
and the basically the party members coming out against Hatarto and saying that okay, they don't agree with him essentially when he spoke for extending Djokovic's term or a constitutional amendment to do so. So I was talking about his hold on the party and if he'd actually be able to sway decision making if push comes to shove eventually.
Right, yeah. So yeah, Golkar, you're quite right, is very dynamic. Ironically, this is the party that had been one of the three pillars of the Suharto regime, along with the civil service and the army. Fast forward to 2022, and Golkar is actually the only party out of the nine that has genuine democratic structures within it. It's actually a bona fide institution, rather than being a political vehicle for an individual elite. Um, so therefore, there's cross currents, there's factions, there's institutional mechanisms, all within Golkar that drive its decision making. It's not entirely up to the party chair himself. And as you noticed, there was some real friction within Golkar when Erlangga Hartarto went out and backed the term extension idea for Widodo. So there are plenty of elements within Golkar that are not necessarily ready to fall behind Hartarto, and there are some that are keen to rival him for party chair when his term ends in 2024, including Bambang Susatyo, who's a figure with ties to the Pemuda Pancasila, a paramilitary organization that does protection services in the mining sector, for example. So there's a host of possibilities out there. Ultimately, the thing to remember with Golkar, the one feature that tends to unify them is that they very much like to be in power, and they're loath to be in opposition. Therefore, if they see that Ganjar is somebody who is the clear front runner in the presidential race, they could very well fall into line behind him, even though they don't really share his reformist inclinations on policymaking. The party has done that in the past, in particular in the Yudhoyono era. So that's a real option. So that would involve the party then rebelling against Erlangga's ideas about trying to get a nomination for himself. Erlangga's pursuit of a nomination for himself is not likely to happen because no other party is going to join a ticket backing him because it would lose. So he'll have to give up eventually, and when he does, then it's a question of whether which candidate Golkar chooses as an institution.